Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Editor Chris Clow to talk about the CFPB's focus on the reverse space, including their action against a reverse servicer. Chris, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me back, Sarah.
Always a pleasure. And today we're going to, you cover two different beats for us. You cover all of our reverse news, and then you also keep an eye on what's happening on the federal level. A lot of times that means regulatory. And in today's podcast, those two worlds sort of collide, right? Because we have the CFPB taking action against a reverse company. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so this primarily has to do with the servicing operation under the purview of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD maintains a subservicing contract for loans that are assigned to the department after it reaches 98% of its maximum claim amount. At that point, the loans are automatically assigned to HUD, and it's HUD's responsibility to service them. So the company that had the servicing contract from 2014 until 2022 was a company called Novad Management Consulting, and they were the ones who were responsible for servicing the HUD reverse portfolio. And throughout that time, I had heard from people in the business, from people even outside of the business, and from other observers on the servicing side, that Novad had issues in managing the HECM portfolio that it was responsible for. That kind of came to a head around the pandemic, and then just after the pandemic, rumors and rumblings started to circulate that HUD was trying to locate a new HECM servicing contractor, but nothing really materialized until 2022, when it was finally announced by HUD that they had selected CompuLink Corporation, or C-Link, as the new holder of the HECM servicing contract. When I covered that development originally, I naturally reached out to people in the business to get their reactions to it, and I think it's pretty safe and fair to characterize that reaction as resoundingly positive. C-Link is a very experienced reverse mortgage servicer and subservicer, and a lot of the back-end issues that had cropped up in the intervening 6.5 years or so, it was felt by a lot of people in the industry at the time that the contract was handed off that the development would be good and that C-Link could potentially do a better job than Novad. Novad did launch a protest to try and hold on to the servicing contract that was dismissed by the General Services Administration, and C-Link assumed control of the contract that December. And now we have, I can't say it's out of the blue necessarily, because we know that the CFPB has had a little more focus on reverse mortgage issues over the past couple of years. But they took action against Novad and a subcontractor, Sutherland Global, which I think is a reasonably well-known entity in the mortgage and housing finance industries, for basically having an insufficient number of staff to handle a portfolio dealing with as many as 150,000 borrowers per year. The CFPB enforcement action notification made mention of deficiencies in properly responding to complaints in a timely fashion. Director Rohit Chopra of the CFPB, he said, quote, "Sutherland and Novad were unprepared to support the hundreds of thousands of older homeowners whose reverse mortgages the defendants were responsible for. The defendants ignored complaints and calls for help, and they let problems snowball into disasters. Older homeowners did not choose Sutherland and Novad as their reverse mortgage servicer, and the CFPB is holding these defendants accountable for their unlawful neglect," end quote. And Chopra went on to characterize the neglect as even putting up unneeded barriers for borrowers to submit really necessary documentation to the servicer to keep their loan in good standing. There's an annual occupancy requirement for a reverse mortgage where you have to notify your servicer that you are continuing to live in the home as your primary residence. And there were complaints that emerged that people were not able to submit that documentation. They were told they were in foreclosure when they really weren't. and were not provided proper loss mitigation options, according to what the CFPB is laying down here. So basically what the CFPB has done is they have barred both Novad and Sutherland from participating in the reverse mortgage industry. I think it was Sutherland that has been fined $11.5 million to reverse mortgage borrowers that they say have been financially harmed, and an additional $5 million to the CFPB that's going to be deposited into the Victims Relief Fund. Novad's fine, however, is only $1 because they had a declaration of an inability to pay. And so the CFPB said that by requiring Novad to pay at least $1 in penalties, then the Bureau can make consumers eligible for additional relief from the Victims Relief Fund in the future. So a lot of moving parts here and a lot of history to it.
Lot of history. It strikes me, when I, back in the day, let's say even like 7-8 years ago, the forward servicers doing the forward mortgage loans were in the crosshairs of the CFPB in a big way, right? Coming off the great financial crisis, and just, there was a lot of, I was at that servicing conference. It's sort of famous now because at the time, Richard Cordray stood up and basically scolded the entire room of mortgage servicers about how bad they were doing at the servicing conference. And then there was such a stark contrast to that and that era. And then what servicers on the forward side, at least most of them, did during the COVID time, right? I mean, they really stepped up and, have won kudos for the way that they moved people through. There were obviously some backward steps. There were also obviously some missteps, but generally speaking, they've gotten a lot of recognition for the good job they did, in a really crisis moment where they had to pull together so fast to help people with the forbearance, to help with loss mitigation. And so interesting that during that same period, there was some not so great things happening on the reverse side, at least in this one case.
Yeah, and the reaction that I got, there were several people that I reached out to who did not want to speak on the record about this decision. But I did manage to get a hold of a pretty prominent reverse mortgage educator named Dan Holtquist, who wrote the book Understanding Reverse, and he has a couple of other books designed to broaden understanding about a bunch of different topics within the reverse mortgage ecosystem and industry. And he basically said that Novad's failure to properly service the loans that were assigned to HUD damaged the industry. This is what Dan said. And but the move to then assign the contract to C-Link has done a lot to sort of symbolize the efforts that the industry is making to improve its reputational issues. And it's conceivable that a lot of those reputational issues, or at least a portion of them, could have come from the back-end experience that both borrowers and their trusted advisors, including family members, had. And so, whether or not this will help to improve the reputation of the industry on a longer timeline, obviously right now it's not we can't determine that at this point in time. But if the experience is going to be improved enough with C-Link in the driver's seat for the HUD HECM servicing contract, then it's at least conceivable that there could be some progress made on that front. But we'll have to see, way further down the line, like 3-4 years, if this has made a substantive difference. But the industry was certainly, like I said, happy that there was another servicing contractor. I had not heard about a chronic understaffing issue at Novad prior to this enforcement action coming out. But considering a lot of the complaints that are laid out here and things that I've heard in the past, it's pretty understandable that a lack of staffing has led to such a pronounced enforcement action on the part of the CFPB.
So I know that on the when you go to originate the loan or initiate the reverse loan, there's a lot more that the loan officer has to do. It's a much higher touch experience. They have to go through counseling. They have to, the way that they have to walk borrowers through that. On the reverse side, when it comes to servicing, is it the same? Are there a lot more touches than you would normally see?
I think that it's reasonably fair to say yes, just in the sense that there's a lot of other active requirements that a senior borrower is involved in, particularly when it comes to the occupancy side. There are some similarities, sure, but there's additional difficulties that are created in servicing reverse mortgages for older borrowers, particularly if they're very advanced in age, because sometimes it can be hard to give them really important or critical servicing notifications if like they haven't checked their mail in a while, or they don't have people checking in on them to make sure that they are keeping their tax payments and insurance payments up to speed to keep their loan in good standing. The Some of the biggest problems that I've heard on the servicing side from people in the servicing business usually relate to adequate communication. Oftentimes, reverse mortgage servicers will rely on the relationship that was established between a borrower and their loan officer, because the chance is reasonably high that if a borrower gets some sort of notification from maybe a company they don't recognize, maybe their loan was sold to another servicer and they don't know why they're getting this particular notice about their loan, then the originator is going to be the first person they call to say, well, is this real? Is this something I need to pay attention to? Because you have to balance that with, particularly during the refinance boom, with a lot of communications that borrowers got from other lenders trying to get them to refinance their loans. And all of that just snowballs into a broader communication issue. Some of that is being mitigated by the embracing of online portals and technology. And older Americans, I think, don't get as much credit as they probably should for being up to date on the tools that they can use to manage their finances. I think a lot of people in the reverse industry have found that as well. But being able to accurately and adequately communicate with the borrower has been a pretty consistent issue on the reverse mortgage servicing front. So in that sense, it is absolutely higher touch. And making sure the borrowers are aware of the tools that they have available to them to stay up to date on any communications they might get from their servicer, or in some cases from FHA and HUD.
I think those are all great points. I mean, that is always the challenge of servicing, is you're communicating with borrowers who might not recognize you, might not even open the email, open the letter, whatever it is, because, it changes hands and they don't really understand that whole process to begin with. So can only imagine, that might be more difficult if you're older. Now, we don't want to paint with a broad brush, but I think all of us have older relatives that were often called on to help with different communication issues, especially internet issues. So I think that that's probably where that, expectation comes from, is like, oh gosh, are we talking about the remote again?
Yeah, exactly. Hi, Mom. I am Mom's tech support. So, yeah.
Well, and just, in all honesty, my son is my tech support. So he works in tech. So he just, for all of our family, he is the go-to, even though, he hasn't lived at home for like a decade. It's still like, hey, hon, can you help me with this? So I am that grandma probably at some point. Well, let's talk about some more things that the CFPB is doing in this space. So you always check up on what's happening with the consumer complaint database that the CFPB runs, specifically on the reverse mortgage side. So what did you see when you checked in, this half year in June? What did you see the complaints looking like, and are they up or down?
So far, they are down for 2024, at least in comparison to the first 6 months of last year. There were a total of 131 reverse mortgage related consumer complaints to the CFPB between January 1st and June 10th. And that's 52 fewer complaints compared to the same time in 2023. 42% of those complaints were related to trouble during the payment process, which is usually customers trying to contact their lender or their servicer to fix an issue with the management or servicing of a loan. 1 in 3 complaints roughly had to do with borrowers that were struggling to pay. A portion of those, a small portion, were specifically related to foreclosures. And with foreclosure and reverse mortgages, it's a little bit different, because the industry absolutely wants to ensure as much as is possible within their ability to manage things, that A foreclosure never results in a displacement of a borrower who is still living in their home. But foreclosures are also, in most cases, the most common way to actually conclude the loan, particularly for a borrower who has passed away and maybe they don't have any heirs to manage it, or maybe they don't have any heirs that would have an interest in the property. Then foreclosure is usually the way that that lenders will recoup costs. But so those kinds of notices could come from borrowers, but they could also come from families. That's or heirs to the property. That's the only reason that I mentioned that. The vast majority of those complaints were responded to in a timely manner, according to the database. And again, these are just customer submitted complaints. They don't necessarily indicate that any wrongdoing has taken place, just that someone was dissatisfied. And so, because the reverse mortgage industry is so very interested and dialed into those reputational issues, as I alluded to before, they're going to be interested to see what the track record is like. And so far, it looks like the track record is pretty good. Companies with most complaints listed, Ocwen Financial was the source of 43 complaints. Peer Advisors is the parent of C-Link, and they got 16. Finance of America received 9, and AAG received 8, even though now it's a subsidiary of Finance of America. But for certain borrowers, AAG might still be on their loan documents. So overall, this is trending in a positive direction for the reverse mortgage industry. But there's obviously still going to be some work to do. But in terms of the broader look at the wider mortgage industry, during that same time between January 1st and June 10th, 8,954 mortgage-related complaints were submitted to the CFPB. So the reverse complaints comprise only 1.4% of that total. Granted, there's a lot fewer borrowers that are served by the reverse mortgage industry, but considering the amount of reverse mortgages that are out there, I think most people in the industry will be happy to see this trend, so long as it continues to hold. We'll have to see.
No, that's really good context. I mean, yes, there's a lot fewer, but so that's good that it's fewer. And we know that the way, or when they've told us in the past, the way that the CFPB views this database is they're looking for trends. They're looking for trends across the board. Like, are we seeing a lot of the same kind of complaint, which might mean that we need to do some rulemaking, or are we seeing people who are not responding companies that are not responding in a timely manner? Right? They want to know that, of course, there's going to be things that go wrong or whatever. They want to make sure that lenders are really on top of the complaints. And, this is one of the few things you can do as a consumer to really, shine light here. I don't think it's a favorite of everybody in the industry because it's like, what's happening with this data. But generally speaking, we see it as like they're looking for trends and they're looking on specific lenders. How fast are you responding? And was it resolved to the satisfaction of the person who did it? And according to what you wrote up, it looked like that was also very good, that people were satisfied with what happened after they complained.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not too far outside the realm of possibility to see the consumer complaint database connected with the enforcement action, because one of the ways that the CFPB gets that information about the source of those complaints is by relying on those consumer submissions to get a better understanding of what the dynamic is like. So if what you talk about in terms of analyzing trends, I'm sure that the CFPB is acting based on all of the information that it has been given over the past several years, which probably played a part in what happened most recently. But at the same time, too, yeah, the industry is going to be keeping a really close eye on this and trying to manage those pain points and smooth them over wherever possible. Reverse mortgage servicers are always going to be interested in improving customer experience, whether you're talking about a dedicated servicer or a lender servicer, a company like Longbridge, for instance, who services their own loans. In most of the conversations that I have with those servicing professionals, they are very, very committed to trying to smooth over those pain points wherever possible. And with these more recent developments and with this higher attention on servicing and reverse mortgages in general, it'll be really interesting to see what this database looks like at the end of this year and beyond.
No, great. Thanks for wrapping, what you saw there. That's really helpful. And I do think that the reverse community First of all, it's a very tight-knit community, and they are absolutely very sensitive to any sort of like complaints or people saying bad things, right? They have a reputation that they have tried to build since the changes came into the reverse mortgage laws that were put in place. So it's a different product. So of course they're very sensitive to that, which leads us to this next story, which is just kind of a fun, not a fun one, but definitely something a little bit different, which is you reported on a mayor in, was it Australia? Is it New Zealand? Where is it?
New Zealand. Yeah.
New Zealand, who, because they're facing some of the same things we are with, rise in property taxes and other things, other costs to fixed income people. He suggested reverse mortgages, and just, it landed him in a lot of trouble. And then he pushed back on that. So I thought it mirrored our situation in the U.S. in a lot of interesting ways. So maybe fill us in on what happened there.
Absolutely. So this particular individual's name is Tim Cadogan. He is the mayor of the Central Otago district in south central New Zealand, which is a reasonably populous district in the country. And at a recent meeting, he fielded a question from a constituent about what they're calling rate rises that basically are akin to U.S. property taxes. And this individual was on a fixed income, asked about how they are supposed to manage such things. And Mayor Cadogan basically said, well, you could always get a reverse mortgage. And this set off, it detonated what you might think of like as a political bomb, basically, because a lot of people jumped on him for, having a lot of hubris in making such a recommendation, and thought that it was like a cynical recommendation, or that it came from a place that might have indicated a lack of understanding for the particular person he was speaking with. But yeah, you're right. He has pushed back, and actually, even since I wrote this story, he has continued to push back on these assertions that people have made about the recommendation. He has a weekly column that he publishes locally, and he said, quote, "I was accused by one of the speakers of being out of touch with reality, but here is the reality of what I was faced with more than once during these drop-in sessions. An elderly person telling me that the proposed rates increases on top of all the other bills that have skyrocketed in recent times would mean they couldn't afford food or heating." He went on to talk about people across the country, and particularly counselors across the country, facing this perfect storm, he said, of increased regulation, increased compliance, and increased costs, and that the nation's older population, or the pensioners as they call them, are faced with absorbing them on a fixed income. So something's got to give. How are you supposed to potentially finance these rate increases if you are reliant on a fixed income? And that's where the reverse mortgage recommendation came from. There are a few key differences between reverse mortgages that are offered in New Zealand and Australia and the U.S. For instance, every reverse mortgage in New Zealand is offered by a private institution, whereas the reverse mortgage program here, the home equity conversion mortgage, is sponsored by Federal Housing Administration under the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. There is no such government involvement for reverse mortgages in New Zealand. The minimum age is a little bit younger. It's reasonably comparable to what you might find on the proprietary side of the reverse mortgage industry in the U.S. But all that to say that, like you said, seniors worldwide are struggling with these cost increases and are trying to find some way to shore things up. And so this mayor made an offhanded recommendation and is paying some political prices for it that he continues to fight to this day.
Well, in this world, as we know, you can be on the other side of the world in New Zealand and go viral, and people all over the world will let you know how they feel about it, even though it may be none of their business. I think the thing that struck me about the interview that you covered was that he was talking about, the solution to these rising prices is the fact that many of these older people are sitting on all this equity. So that is the same thing here, right? Is like they have, people in a certain age group often have a lot of equity. At the same time, they don't have any income coming in. So, or they have fixed income coming in. So I thought it was interesting that, this is a solution, like you said, that's different there, but a solution that mirrors what's going on here.
Yeah, most definitely. And most seniors in New Zealand are supported by a dedicated fund designed to help them live in later life, but it only covers usually the costs of bare essentials. So when your food costs are going up and your energy costs are going up, then you're going to need to try to find some way, whether it's jumping back in the workforce, as a lot of people seem to choose to do, or making use of these other tools. That is one of the things that led to an increase in reverse mortgage adoption in this region of the world in 2022. Heartland Bank is the leading reverse mortgage lender in that part of the world. And they saw a jump in adoption in 2022 as a result of that. So as rates have persisted and as high costs have persisted, as inflation has persisted globally, really, we actually haven't seen the brunt of inflation here as some other parts of the world have. Then you got to make these recommendations where you can. And I think the mayor thought that this was a pragmatic potential solution. And he even told television reporters who interviewed about him that a lot of people said that it was an outrageous thing for me to say, but I'd suggested it's something that I said in an outrageous situation. So, you have to take all the facts where you can and see where they take you.
Well, listen, we support somebody seeing the value in reverse mortgages. I don't know about their system, but we know there's a lot of value here and that it can make a huge difference in someone's life. So kudos to him for understanding that and suggesting it. And Chris, thanks so much for being on. Always a pleasure to catch up on what's going on in the different beats that you cover, and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah.